I'm Miwa Messer. I'm the producer and host of Poured Over. And James McBride. Oh, wow. Does James McBride actually need an introduction? I mean, think about it. Good Lord Bird won the National Book Award. Deacon King Kong was an Oprah pick. And everyone remembers The Color of Water, which is his memoir that kind of kicked off everything. And now we've got The Heaven and Earth Grocery Store, which is fabulous. It's the new novel. It's just out. So obviously we're going spoiler free in this conversation. James, thank you so much for making the time to join us today.
Well, as they say on NPR, thank you for having me. That's
we're not fancy.
That's what they tell you to say. Thank you for having me.
We're not fancy. I'm a bookseller. I'm just excited to talk to you about your work because I love your books. And Heaven and Earth opens a little bit like Good Lord Bird, actually. You do a little flashback thing, and then suddenly we're in the middle of 1936 in a tiny part of a town in Pennsylvania. And I'm hoping you'll set it up a little bit because that'll set me up to ask you a question.
Well, I can't remember how Good Lord Bird opens, but
it's the flashback with Onion telling us.
Yeah, that's right.
How we got it. It's basically a flashback, like how we.
Yeah. It was just one of those things. I mean, you're just trying to get the song to play. That character who opens the Heaven and Earth grocery store is an old Jewish guy that the cops, are suspect of a murder, and they go to see him, and then he basically points the reader in the direction of the story. The first chapter, or the first part of the book, the first 3 pages, so just sets up the story and then allows us to get into that world of this part of town called Chicken Hill where all the blacks and Jews live, and it's the 1930s, and it's every man for himself. It's sort of a microcosm of small town America. My small town America is different than like the Mayberry small town America that you see in the Andy Griffith Show. And the truth is that most small town Americas were not like Mayberry. A lot of them were like Pottstown, which is there's a real Pottstown. This is, a lot of fictional elements, but, where the blacks and Jews and poor immigrants, Irish, Italian live. And that's where a lot of the fun happens.
Right.
A lot of the action. So
we've got a Jewish couple, Shauna and Moisha, and they have a grocery store on Chicken Hill, the Heaven and Earth grocery. And there were bits of Shauna that I felt like I had met before. And you sent me back with this new novel. You sent me back to The Color of Water, which is your story and your mom's story and your sibling's story. And there's some bits where I think your mom is a lot of this book, and her mom is a bit of Shauna too.
Shauna's a disabled person. She has polio, and my grandmother had polio, and it just kind of landed in the grocery store because it initially began at the theater with Moshe, but he falls in love with this, he's a Jewish guy, immigrant, Romanian Jew from Romania, and he falls in love with a Jewish girl, young woman, who happens to be working a grocery store that's owned by her father. So I had a lot of reference because my grandmother was married to a so-called rabbi, and my mother was raised in that grocery store in Suffolk, Virginia. So a lot of the experiences that Shona had, I didn't have to reach far for that character to come to life and start moving around. I mean, at some point it did occur to me that I wanted, my grandmother, my real grandmother, my Jewish grandmother, did not have a very happy life, in part because her husband was a mess, and she was isolated in this small town in the South where anti-Semitism was very rampant. And so I wanted my grandmother to have a better life. So I put her on the page and I made her loved. But I won't say I made her loved. Shona was loved by everybody because she just had such style. She was so far ahead of things. Because of my mother's history and my own history, I suppose I have become a fan of Jewish women in the early part of the 20th century, like Belle Moskowitz and Emma Goldman and people like that. These were mavericks, man. They were like far out, and they had to do a lot of hiding and ducking and all this business, but they got the business done. So, a lot of these things were fused into Chona's character. And then she started to roll. And in my books, characters started to take over. And Chona just took over the book. She was great. She was a wonderful character. And then, of course, she and her husband come up with this problem where they have to, they're confronted with this business of having to hide this deaf black child, boy, from the state. And it's really Chona's idea. It's really Chona's accepts the challenge. Her husband doesn't really, but she does. And it ends up drawing the whole community into the Chicken Hill, into the dramas that take place inside the Heaven and Earth grocery store. And of course, several important black characters are involved as well. So
it's very much a James McBride novel. There's a lot. That Shaggy Dog story kind of quality to Deacon King Kong. There's a lot of that here. You introduce characters and I'm like, okay, where are we going? What's happening here? It's really excellent. There is a musicality, though. There is a musicality to your novels. Even if we're talking about Good Lord Bird, there is something, not just in the dialogue, not just in the characters' names. I mean, Fatty and Paper and Dodo and Monkey Pants. And I mean, there's some great names of characters in this book, but it's also just the way you talk about the place itself, the way people come together. It's fun, even when you're talking about complicated stuff.
The sum of your life is what you pay attention to.
Right.
And so all of us have complicated pieces of business. We were talking off camera, you and I, you said your brother plays the saxophone, he plays Selma. And, I know what a Selma is because I have a Selma. And he doesn't have his Selma with him. He has his other horn. And I as a saxophone player, I know like if a cat has a Selma and he doesn't have it with him, he's probably not playing he's not playing Carnegie Hall. He's probably playing something, not quite as important. He can kick it around, knock it around a little bit. But, it's only something that he and I would know, or you, because you're his sister. But the point is that he's still making the music for somebody. And he's simplifying somebody's life. And he's making somebody a little bit happier today when he picks up that horn and sticks it in his mouth. That's what counts. A lot of the stuff that we go through doesn't count. So, what I try to do in my books is I really want people to I just want to show how we get along and we manage despite the complexity of things. And despite that, we're living in a world where, evil often succeed and villains succeed and heroes sometimes die. We still manage to get along pretty good and sometimes have fun at the same time. I mean, that's what I'm trying to do.
The amount of laughter, like I'm not openly cautious if I'm reading you in public because people need to be prepared for me to be very loud and laughing a lot when I'm reading your stuff. But this book feels a little more personal for you, I think, than the last couple. And I know, you talked about Deacon King Kong and how those characters come out of people you knew in your childhood, right? Like you actually knew people like Hot Sausage and Chicken. You have written a whole riff on Chicken Man in The Color of Water. And I'm just wondering if that made you looser on the page, if that let you go places you hadn't gone before. Because it really does feel like you're in it in a different kind of way in this book.
I am actually, not that I never thought of it that way. I was always a little bit reluctant to write about Jewish characters.
Right.
Because, Jewish readers can really be fussy. When I did The Color of Water, I'd go around, people say, why did you say this? And, I mean, if you can find two Jewish people that agree on anything, like I'll give you $100 right now. I mean, So I didn't really want to get into that too much because I didn't really want to have, the idea of going around and publicizing a book and then having people raise their hand and say, something, what you should have said, because I just think that it gets into like a lot of complicated business of people's lives that I really don't want to, I'm not interested in it.
Right.
If you have like a, some kind of moral religious thing to play out, I ain't the guy to be doing that with. But I did love my mother.
Yeah.
And I did love her mother, although I never met her. And I've gotten to know several members of my Jewish family. And we're a complicated family, but we're still a family.
Right.
And we still laugh a lot. We still have lots of things that are good for people to hear. But so I wanted to kind of explore that part of my creativity. And also, I worked at this camp when I was in college that was run by a Jewish guy, and he was just an extraordinary guy.
Yeah.
He was gay, and he had to hide it, although we all knew it. And it was just a great experience for us. We all learned a lot. When I say we, I mean staff. We learned more from him and the kids than we learned from anywhere else in many ways. And I wanted to honor him. And that's how the book really started. It really started to honor him in this camp.
Right.
I couldn't write about a camp. It was campy, you know, and then was singing. So it just didn't work. It didn't capture the wildness of it.
Yeah.
And the improvisational quality of life there, because it was run by someone who really believed in equality for all people. And it got me to thinking about the notions of, and I was hired by an old Jewish guy, and the camp was founded by some old Jewish, Romanian Jewish theater owners. And, you know, these people were interesting folks. They had interesting stories. So this is what happens when you play the melody good enough, you can start playing, the jazz follows, you know?
We've got the theater sort of down the slope from Chicken Hill, right? I mean, that's sort of how the layout of the landscape is. Moishe's theater is sort of downhill. Grocery stores in the hills, in Chicken Hill.
Right.
And the way you bring all of these storylines together, when I think of you as a writer, I think of the love that you put on the community and the way you write about people who don't usually get written about, right? Like maybe the famous theater owners get written about at some point kind of thing, but like you're writing about people who do get left out of a lot of stories.
Well, that's where I live, you know. That's where I live. I mean, those are my people, man. And they're the most interesting people. I mean, to use the music metaphor, beat it to death. It's not the first trumpet player that's really interesting. It's the third violinist, you know, who's and this is her third date this month. She's had 3 dates. The first were good, and this is the third one. And there's no more dates, no more gigs until next month. That's a person who's got an interesting life. And, you know, as an African-American who grew up in African-American life in New York, you know, I've met lots of people like that. At this camp, for instance, I was talking about, most of those people who worked there didn't become famous. I mean, they did very well, became school teachers and medical, doctors and lawyers. But, you know, nobody knows them. Right. But I know them. And the kids were life-changing. Yeah. So, I mean, that's why I live. I'm not the kind of writer who can go to Florida and kick it, you know, look at the beach and drink a little whatever they drink. I can't do that. I lose my mind, you know?
When did you start working on Heaven and Earth Grocery Store?
A long time ago. I started maybe like 2008. I went to Norristown State Hospital and talked my way in.
Okay.
And the people there were kind enough to let me see the place and walk around and even meet patients and go to the library and go walk in the tunnels underneath. And that's when the research started, because I was trying to write about a camp, and I ended up looking at state hospitals for the so-called mentally insane. And I couldn't get into Pennhurst, but I could get into Norristown, which was still functioning. Pennhurst is closed. Pennhurst State Hospital, which makes an appearance in this book. In any case, I started it, and then I stopped it, and got Deacon King Kong and Good Lord Bird going again, and you're always pregnant. You always got something going. So
that's fair.
I'm always working on something, while I'm working on something else, and you hope it just it comes together. So it took a long time.
Yeah. Wait. So at one point you're working on these 3 amazing books at once? Well,
I was working on one point. No, I mean, I think did the Good Lord Bird. I was on the Good Lord Bird while doing the Heaven and Earth Grocery Store research, and then I just set it aside, and then I rolled into Deacon King Kong, and I didn't do too much with Heaven and Earth. After Deacon King Kong, I got back into it. I always had, I would go visit, when I would travel for one of these books, or was traveling with my band or traveling as a musician. If I went somewhere and there was like a mental, closed insane asylum or something nearby, I'd go see it.
Okay.
I'd go visit it. I'd ask people who had experiences with it and so forth. So I was always kind of have my eye on getting it right. But that was the hardest part of the book to write, really, about, life in that place for Dodo, the kid.
You have a great line, though, about friendship between Dodo and his buddy, Monkey Pants, that is two boys with intelligent minds trapped in bodies that would not cooperate. The insanity seeming to live on in itself and change them, for despite the horribleness of their situation, they were cheered by the tiniest of things, like here these two little boys are. And I'm not going to go too deep into it because I feel like it's a giant piece of the book, but I love these little boys. Dodo and Monkey Pants are amazing characters, but you really have to step out of being an adult to write kids like this.
Well, the truth is that I knew kids like Dodo and Monkey Pants when I was at the Variety Club camp. What really struck me about them when I first started working with them and all through the years that I worked with, and I still know a few of them, they are quite normal. I mean, you get beyond the physical part or even some of the mental part. You're dealing with kids who are really smart, who know how to get on your nerves, who know how to poke you where you hurt. I mean, yep. And who rarely ever complain about anything. Are so happy to be living and breathing that they know what's important. And when you've never seen real joy until you've experienced how some of these kids find joy in the smallest of places. So, one of the great sadnesses I had while writing the book was when Dodo has to enter this place, so, and that created some, plot issues as well, because you can't leave the reader with the kid in there. You gotta get them out some kind of way. And, oftentimes, at least in my books, plot, character and plot are weaved together, and these situations kind of come together, and then you're hoping that one of these things will unroll properly so that it comes out in a way that gives you and the reader some hope.
There's a little bit of a caper flick happening in a big part of this book, which was a treat, because it's like you said, you've got to figure out how to unroll this, how to get the story where you need it to go, and it's kind of classic.
Well, I mean, man, you're just making my day the way you're chatting up. And I'm telling you. But I had a lot of characters to work with.
Yeah.
I had a lot of characters that I could work with to do this, to help Dodo get rolled out. I mean, the power of the book really is that Chona was a loving person, was loved so much that, what emanated from her sort of pushed into everyone else's life and pushed their evil aside. And that's the kind of world that I like to visit and be part of, and hope that people would be amenable to learning about. I don't want to write a book that depresses people. I can't read a depressing book,
When you have characters like these, you kind of don't need... It's really satisfying. That's the one thing I keep coming back to when I read books like Heaven and Earth Grocery Store or Deacon King Kong or Good Lord Bird. There's a verve and a style and just kind of an irreverence to what you're doing, where you're just kind of like, well, I know these are the stories you've heard before about other things, but I'm going to actually show you what the world is like, right? Like, there's that riff you have on the American Dream when we're talking about baseball in Deacon King Kong, and baseball is not my game, but the way you talk about how sort of, yeah, we think it's this one thing and actually it turns out to be nothing like it. Right. Or, all of Good Lord Bird and John Brown and Frederick Douglass. And here's Little Onion being like, well, those two, those guys that you keep hearing about, here I am, and I'm actually going to tell you the story.
Don't meet your heroes in this world.
Oh,
you meet your heroes, okay. You'd be totally disappointed. So it's better that you just have some guy or some person on the side saying, listen, check this out. This is what really happened. That's much better, much more interesting to me, and much better than somebody telling me what I should be thinking about it. So look, at one point in my life, in my rather long life, I worked at People magazine. I covered Michael Jackson for the People magazine for 6 months, like exclusively, like travel with him and all this. And one of the things that magazine really did well was that it just talked about like a little bit of the gossipy things, but then it threw a little taste of the news in there at the same time. A little gossipy, a little news, a little gossipy, a little news. That was frankly the only thing I got out of it, because I really hated working there. But there is people listen, a story is good. It always begins this way. This is a story about a woman who, or it's a story about a man who, a story about a person who, whatever. People don't really worry about the gross national product. If you want to really know how a country's doing, you don't ask about the gross national product. You ask, how do they treat their children and their old people?
Mm-hmm.
It's about people. So books are about people.
You ask a question, though, in Heaven and Earth, and I feel like it pops up in other books as well, but like, how do you restore something that never existed, right? Like, you've got all of these folks, Chana and Moisha and Fatty and Beatrice and Paper and all of these characters who are living their own lives. They know they're living outside of sort of, let's call it a standard narrative, right? Like, there's a whole part of the town with the doctor, and then there's a town councilman who's really quite a piece of work and make some bad business decisions. And so you sort of take the whole story and say, well, listen, yeah, you don't actually know what you think you know. And it's really subversive and fun in a way. And I'm wondering where you're starting. Like, I think you start with character, right? Like, isn't that where it always starts for you?
We can all stand our own dirt.
Right.
But we can't seem to stand the dirt of others, no matter what, no matter who they are.
Mm-hmm.
And that grind is where characters sit up on the page and start moving around.
Okay.
I mean, you can get them to sit up on the page, but to get them to walk from one room to the next, there's got to be some grind between them, some secret they have, something that rolls out. They don't want everyone to see. I mean, like, I can't look at myself in the mirror sideways. When I look at myself in the mirror sideways, I say, oh my God, man, your head is too big. Your stomach's sticking out. What's the matter with you? You know what I mean? So everyone's got that.
Right.
So you're trying to show that a little bit,
mm-hmm.
and show how it bumps up against the next person, man or woman.
Right.
Because we all have imperfections that we work really, really hard to hide. When you peel that back just a little bit, not a lot, because, the mistake that a lot of writers make, they just go like, whop, and they just show them. And that's no good. It's just
right.
like, it's not, it doesn't even feel real. But when you just like, you just a look, oh, wait a minute.
Yeah,
I mean, just that enough is.
Yeah.
So that's kind of where, I kind of work with these characters. In a small town, everything
mm-hmm.
copacetic.
Right.
It's not really the Andy Griffith Show. People are cutting deals. And
yep.
I covered a small town when I was a reporter. One of my first jobs in journalism was covering a small town. And these guys were like, and they were all guys.
Yep.
They were rough, man. They didn't even like each other. If you know enough, if you have enough mileage on your odometer, you can find things, you can find hooks to hang your story on to make characters connect.
Right. So wait, you said that the whole thing starts with this camp that you worked at.
Right.
This wonderful guy who hired you.
Right.
But then how do we get to Chicken Hill? Who's the first character who shows up after you decide this is the book that I need to start picking away at?
What happened was, I've tried to write this book about the camp.
Mm-hmm.
I wrote several chapters. And the only chapter that was good was the chapter about this theater owner who opens his theater and he goes into debt and he's trying to get the great Mickey Katz to come.
Yep.
Everything else sounded like, it just read like Pulp Fiction. So I just got rid of it. I got rid of it and I went, I wanted to place it in Pottsville, which is in Western PA near Pittsburgh.
Okay.
But it was too far from where I live. And I just happened to, I was driving down the road and I saw a sign that said Pottstown. I said, well, this is, let me see what this Pottstown looks like. It's not Pottsville. And it was a beautiful town.
Mm-hmm.
So I started hanging around, asking questions, and there was a real Chicken Hill there.
Oh, okay.
And then I started asking more questions about, there was a Jewish temple there. And then, there was it still is a fancy school there, private school. And it used to be a manufacturing center where all of these, businesses of Bethlehem Steel and Flag Industries, and then all that's gone. I said, okay, let me place it here. Now I just got to inhabit this place with some characters. Pennsgrove, whatever. The state institution, mental institution is just the next town over.
Right. So everything's within a really tight radius.
Yeah. So you have all your physical things there. And then it was about finding, the right kinds of characters, right kinds of Jewish characters, the right kinds of Black characters. Black characters are very varied in this book, and the kind of other townspeople who make up this story.
All right. So when you're sitting down, though, and really committing to the idea of heaven and earth grocery store, right? Are you letting the characters drive, or are you just walking through a bit of plot and then you sort of piece it all together? Or is this just you're kind of sitting down and riffing until you have a thing?
If you ever hear the first 20 bars of the song St. Thomas by Sonny Rollins, you'll know exactly what I did, because Sonny Rollins.
I actually do know that piece.
Okay, well, if you listen to the first 20 bars of Sonny Rollins solo on, which I wish Heaven and Earth Grocery Store had that kind of brilliance. It doesn't have that kind of brilliance, but what Sonny Rollins did was he has he goes bid up, and then he just rolls off that one bid up, and then he flies up, and then he comes back to it again, and then he goes, and he's a pure improviser.
Yes.
That's pure improvisation, as opposed to these cats who play the same thing but in a different key. And what happened with Heaven and Earth's Grocery Store was that Moshe's relationship and his love of Chona was so powerful that I just pinged off it. Okay. I just pinged off it, and the circle grew wider. And then Addie and her husband, Nate, their song began. So each character drove the plot deeper and deeper. There was always this idea of how we're going to get somebody in this institution,
right,
so that we can show how horrible, number one, how horrible it is, and number two, how to get out of it, or how these kids in these institutions who are forced to be with adults. So it was always about that. And really Nate's relationship with Dodo was kind of the crutch that pushed the book into, pushed the boat into the water and allowed it to move. It's a character-driven piece of work, and plot is always driven by character. When it's done the other way around, it never works.
This would be a really different book. This would be a wildly, wildly different book. And I think, again, you write with an incredible amount of heart, and you can feel the characters being themselves.
You are blowing me up, man. I mean, geez. I mean,
I'm also noodling around in Deacon King Kong. There's some stuff from Deacon King Kong that I'm trying not to bounce back to, because we are talking about Heaven and Earth Grocery Store. But there is some stuff that you do where I'm just like, okay, anyone else, I might raise an eyebrow, but I'm like, no. This is, I just want to hear the rest of the story. And there are some moments in Heaven and Earth, and certainly, when we're in the institution, there's some stuff that made my eyes get really big. But I knew that you were going to get me through to the other side. And that, yes, I would be changed as a reader on the other side, but I would get a very satisfying ending, which, I think we can say that without.
Well, listen, I mean, as they say, and the customer's always right. But I mean, I just want my dreams to come true, but in a way that's believable, in a way that makes, look, the guy who ran that camp that I was telling you about, he's still alive.
Oh,
and he
seriously?
got married, and he lives in Florida. His name is Cy Friend. He's, I sent him the book as soon as I was finished. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And and when he said he liked it, it meant the world to me.
That's
so you have to suspend your sense of belief when you drag yourself through the keyhole into the room of fiction.
Yes.
If you can't do that, you shouldn't be doing it.
Right.
Because it's just too hard to do. I mean, it's just so hard to write novels. Mm-hmm. So, but when they go right, there's nothing like it. And at a certain point, it seemed like this was going right. Mm-hmm. I like to think that, that the spirit sometimes, entered the room and got me through some of the more difficult sections. I think about my grandmother when I was writing it. Mm-hmm. And also wanted to kind of give a nod to the early, the early Jewish Americans from the early part of the 20th century, these union rabble-rousers and these socialists and all that stuff they did. No one even remembers who they are. E.L. Doctorow does. I mean, E.L. Doctorow wrote about them in his books, in Ragtime and in other books as well. and other people have, but I wanted to do it, as Frank Sinatra would say, my way. I wanted to do it, I wanted to do it, so that, like, yeah, that's what happened.
You've been compared to Mark Twain more than once.
Come on, man.
I do want to poke at this for a second because I think of your voice as very, very separate and very James McBride. And even when you're, Good Lord Bird and Deacon King Kong and Heaven and Earth, they all sit on a continuum, right? Like you're looking at America in a way that you remain hopeful, which I always find kind of, I'm not a cynical person, but there are times where I'm like, oof, are we going to make it? And it seems to me that you've kind of decided that we are ultimately going to be okay if we get out of our own way.
Yeah. I mean, I've been around the world. I'd say Americans are still the most fun. We're still the most fun. We've had some difficult moments, and through any other country, we'd probably be, I don't know what would happen to us. But I'm not cynical about what has happened in this country. You have these cycles of pain and suffering, and everyone thinking of this dystopian future that awaits us. I don't feel that way. You push ahead, you slog forward, and you keep a smile on your face. Don't worry, it'll be all right. Just keep moving, keep moving, keep moving. If I felt like that, I wouldn't be able to write books. I mean, I don't want to say, everything is rosy and cheeky, but if you allow that kind of darkness to cloud your thinking, you're never going to make it. You can't, you have to have these jazz musicians who wrote music, Art Tatum and Train, and all these guys, they all faced enormous problems. Right. Yiddish musicians as well. I love reading about the Yiddish players. They would complain they were not getting paid, and just like jazz player. Tony Bennett Tony Bennett is a good example. Yeah. I met him one time. He was a wonderful guy, not because he was talented, but because it was just in him to spread something nice to people. Right. That's your job as a writer. And people pay you to do it? Come on. Did I ever tell you about the time I met Barack Obama? You want to hear it?
Please tell me the story. Yes, of course I want to hear that.
Well, I got this, I got awarded the National Medal of the Humanities.
Oh, I remember.
So I was sitting right next to Terry Gross.
Yep.
Fresh Air.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, man. So anyway, I went up there and he put the medal around, and then he held his hand out and he said, I appreciate you. That's all he said. I thought that was cool. Listen, we're doing great. We got a really good president, and we're doing great. And we're going to do great. Let it be said, we have a great president. I'm very proud of him. I'm happy he's president. I think Joe Biden's great. Too old, blah, blah, blah. Let him talk. Let the man do his job. If I have a car that I need fixed, am I going to take it to some 30-year-old guy down the street? Or am I going to take it to a guy who's been fixing cars for 50 years? Let the man do his thing. So that's where I stand on that.
Well, I also think that you have this incredible voice, though. You have this very distinctive, very sort of sharp-eyed, but the funny is always there. And I think there are times where I've seen reviews where they kind of miss the point. And I know you don't read your reviews, so you are much better suited on that front than I am, because, of course, I read every single one. And there are times where I'm just like, the voice is what matters, right? Like, I know I keep referencing the musicality of your prose and your dialogue and your character. Like, it's just the way all of these pieces come together.
I saw Bill Evans toward the end of his life, you know, and man, I mean, he would sit there and he would play, and then he would just like, I don't know if he had a drug problem or what, but he would just wait. And then when it was time to play again, he would, and I said, I was my friend was there. I said, man, if I could play like that, I would do anything to be able to express myself that way.
Right.
Because everything he did was so full of joy. Even though when you saw him, he didn't look joyful.
Right.
Every note he played was so full of beauty, and it was like watching sunflowers grow. Just, and so I don't care what other people think about, what I do. I'm happy. I mean, when I wrote The Color of Water, which is, was my first book, I remember, the first interviews, people were like, how does it feel to be a tragic mulatto? But, I never felt like that when we were growing up. We weren't a bunch of, you know, black kids staggering through life trying to decide whether to, eat chicken sandwiches or matzo balls. We were just happy. We just did that and so I've never changed in that way. And I'm surprised that people sometimes that people expect you to know what you really don't know or to be how you really aren't. The older you get, the more you become what you really are. Anyway, so
I'm hearing a little bit of your mom in you. I'm hearing some of Ruth.
That could be, that could be.
There's just a little bit of Ruth. And it might have been that I just recently revisited The Color of Water for the first time in a while. But, a million years ago, when that book first came out, your publisher did a little party. More for you than your mom, but I remember your mom at that party, and she made sure that we knew mom was at the party. It was awesome. She was great. But she gave a speech. It was adorable. You must remember this, but she got up and, man, she made a speech, and she had every single one of us listening. And was she even 5 foot tall?
No, she was, maybe 5 foot tall.
Okay.
Maybe.
But it was wild and wonderful. And she was Ruth.
I don't think she realized the kind of effect that she was having on people. I don't think she realized, the kind of effect that she had even on her own children.
Yeah.
But I will say this, that we do miss her greatly. Mm-hmm. But on the other hand, I'm glad that, I'm glad she's not here to see what this country has kind of gotten itself into. I feel bad that all these people who grew up in the 20s, 30s, and 40s sacrificed so much that we would allow some of these bums to run things now. They would feel like, they've wasted a lot of their time. So although things are going to be okay, we can't forget we are in the midst of a serious struggle. Yeah. And librarians and school teachers and people who love books are we're the last line of reason and discourse. And so we have got to stand strong. So if my book makes you laugh and it gives you joy, then good. But if you don't need laughter and joy, there's plenty of other good books by plenty of other writers that, readers need to get with, because it's time for us to really put our foot down and be who we are, which is to be strong. I mean, this book is about strong people.
Yeah.
There are no weak characters in this book. They all have opinions, and they try to express them as much as they can, however they can.
But again, that goes back to letting people who don't always get to tell their stories, right? Like that. Everyone here gets their turn. Okay, pardon the choice of metaphor, but everyone here gets their turn at the mic. Every character gets their turn. And it may not be the longest solo, but everyone makes their point, and you can see how it all comes together. There is still a little bit of an edge, though. I mean, you are as optimistic as you are and as hopeful as you are. You still have noticed where we are not meeting standards, as it were, or where we should aspire to be a little more.
Well, yeah, sure. I mean, listen, this whole business of white Anglo-Saxon Protestants who are so proud that they, that they had their third cousin on the Mayflower. I mean, give me a break. I mean, come on. What difference does it make? You go to the ABC or whatever it is, this thing, the MJ23, whatever this thing is, where you go find your relatives and blah. How many people I met, you say, I'm related to George Washington. Big deal. Are you helping the world now? If you're not, then get lost. I'm not interested in talking to you.
So what's next? Have you started working on the next thing?
I've been poking around a little bit, but no, I don't have anything. I've been working on a musical that I wrote 30 years ago.
Oh, seriously?
Yeah. It's called Bobos. It's about a kid who wants an expensive pair of tennis shoes. Okay. I wrote it with a guy from Philly named Ed Shockley, and back then we had no juice on Broadway. They didn't care, So I'm gonna run it up the flagpole and see what happens. Okay. So I've been rehearsing it and rewriting it, but I don't have any new books on the horizon now. But it doesn't take me long to write a book. It takes me long to research it.
Yeah.
It's the work, it's the research. So I mean, I have a few things that I'm thinking about, but I'm just not there yet, you know.
How long did Good Lord Bird take to research?
Well, Good Lord Bird, if you go back, I did a book called Song Yet Sung, which was, I think that was my third book.
Mm-hmm.
While I was doing Song Yet Sung, I ran into the story of John Brown. Okay. And that had to be back in 2002 or something like that. Yeah. Long time ago. Mm-hmm. What happened was I really wanted to write about Abraham Lincoln and ended up writing about Harriet Tubman. And then writing about Harriet Tubman, I learned about John Brown, and ended up writing about him. So now I might end up, I'm kind of intrigued with Chinatown.
Yeah.
I might end up in the Philippines. Who knows? But you just you follow the song.
Or the spirit moves you, however you want to describe it. Sometimes you're just in the right place at the right time, and there's the idea, there's the thing sitting in front of you.
Look, don't I have a great job?
Yeah.
I mean, come on. I have a great job.
I benefit from your great job. Are you kidding me?
Well, that's nice of you to say, but I tell you, I got the best job. I mean, I can't complain about that. I got the best job.
So wait, Deacon King Kong, that actually took time to research?
Yeah, because not as much as Good Lord Bird or Grocery Store, but because the Deacon King Kong had all sorts of business in it that had New York in the 1960s. Yeah,
so you did have to go back.
It had South Carolina and the medical profession, and it had art.
Oh, yes.
Art and all that business. And the theft of the art in Deacon King Kong was a bit like the problem of the water in the town of Pottstown in the Heaven and Earth Grocery Store. Like that, you need something that you need some buoys, some lighthouses, so you can float the boat around it. And I was lucky that the art thing showed itself when I was doing Deacon King Kong, and with Heaven and Earth Grocery Store, the whole business of Gus Plitzka, the town councilman, having this problem with the water that's tied to the synagogue. That had, they did this whole sneaky little bit where they were taking the wrong kind of water, taking the water they weren't paying for it. It was a lifesaver, really. The whole business of the bull and the bullfrog and the mikvah was really just a lifesaver moment, because
it's also very funny. Sorry.
Yeah. Well,
the frog was very funny. I mean, it sets off a whole chain of events. One tiny little frog.
Well, it doesn't take much. You just need a little bit. Look, the smaller your story, the better it is.
Yes, exactly. But the tinier the detail, the more you can. The smaller your story, the better it is.
The smaller your story. So if you have a small thing that can say, again, going back to that business of Sonny Rollins doing St. Thomas, finding something really small and then just opening it up. And I mean, when it's just, you make things, you can pull the reader along that way.
Hey, speaking of music, I was re-listening to The Process Volume 1 while I was prepping for this interview. Anything new coming? It's been a while since you've done an album. I mean, I know you've been working with other people and you've been writing music for a really long time, but
what good is a song if it's not about anything?
Okay.
There's so many people who write these songs, they say, here's this new song, it's called The Brown Coffee. And then they make, and then they go, dun, 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 and you forget it. You just forget it 5 minutes past breakfast. Right. I have to have something to write for.
Okay.
But to write music. So I can't really, although I write lots of pretty little melodies at my piano here, and I just got my piano tuned today. It was wonderful to see the guy. He's been tuning my piano for years. I don't really have anything to write about, Okay. I mean, the reason why Steely Dan was such a great band and remains such a great band, Donald Fagen, at least the half that's still alive, they had something to write about.
Yeah.
They wrote about things that really counted. And so I can't really write about I can't really put any music together until I have well, actually, I did a record 2 years ago, but I never released it because I didn't like it.
Okay. Well, that's fair. I mean, it's yours to release or not, but I had to ask. Come on.
Well, that's all right.
You knew I was going to ask.
Well, I appreciate you asking, even though, look, these young guys play music so well. They don't even need they don't need me. I mean, they got, there's so many good young players now. I mean,
yeah, but still, I mean, did you ever record anything with the band that you were touring with after Good Lord Bird? You guys were great.
yeah, we recorded, but we didn't really do much with it. I mean, we didn't, I've never had a big time record deal. I've done songs for people,
right?
For labels, but I've never had the privilege of saying, look, I want to take 50 grand and make a real record that has this and get this arranger, get that player and all. Never had that privilege. But then on the other hand, I write books for a living. What could be better than that?
Well, that's fair.
Listen, I've got to have things to say.
Yeah.
I need a wall to push against. And I don't want to push against the same wall that we're all pushing against now, which is basically trying to, try and make sure that democracy survives. But in some ways, what I'm trying to do with Heaven and Earth and with Good Lord Bird as well is to show the sacrifices that are necessary in order for us to live the life we lead. What I haven't addressed in my work is this whole business of climate change and destroying the world, which is really something that it's big, but it needs to be told small. And how do you do that? I'm thinking about it, but I don't know how. I don't know how. I don't know how to go about that.
I think you just need to hear the voice. I think once you know who the character is, you can build from there. But yeah, I would read that novel. I would totally read that novel.
Well, listen, our acceptance of the norm is what is at once our greatest. That's our greatest enemy. We accept this new heat that we're feeling. We accept the fact that Arctic ice is melting and that the sea is rising and floods become a part of life. That's really where the game should begin. We have to stop the acceptance of that and move and go backwards. But I suppose that's another conversation entirely. I do think, though, the whole business of anti-Semitism, for example, is not new in this country.
Right.
And I'm glad that I had the opportunity to show how it worked in this book. And in a way that is not like, it's just like a turn off and lecturing and so forth.
But then we get Chona, too. And she's not having it. She is Chona.
Oh,
she's not having it. She's kind of a great example of how not to be stuck in a corner by the system.
Absolutely. I mean, listen, I loved her as a character.
She's great.
I admired her greatly. I mean, it was so beautiful to visit with her. I mean, I don't want to tip my hand about what happens to her, but if it wasn't for her, the book wouldn't exist. I mean, as I said, when I broke this all down and I got back to Moshe at the top of the book, the moment Chona shows up, the book begins to, the airplane's on the runway, the wheels come off the tarmac. Yeah. As soon as she enters the book, the movie starts to play. And there's no stopping it at that point. And that's really how the book was happened, Yeah. And I like to think that, that my mother and grandmother had something to do with the shaping of that character. But the truth is, after Chona became Chona, she became herself. Yeah. She had elements of, she didn't look like, I see everything in black and white. So she didn't look like my mother or my grandmother, but she had that power that a woman of that time, particularly a Jewish woman at that time, would have, given that, most of the Jewish women in that town would, they were placid. They didn't say anything. They just went along and so forth. They didn't know what to keep from the old life and what to leave behind. But Chona wasn't having any of that. Chona was a real American, and she could ball her fist up and swing back. And I like characters like that. I don't want someone, we don't need to go to a peace conference to have what we need. Let's go ahead. I mean, she was willing to fight for what she wanted, which was what we all wanted.
She and Hetty from Deacon King Kong might share a little DNA.
Interesting. Yeah, I never thought of that.
But Hetty's got a little bit of, are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? I mean, just thinking about some stuff that happens early on in Deacon King Kong.
Well, Hetty was a little more cynical, though, than Chona.
Okay.
Chona's a more world-weary, a wider-read person.
Yes.
She's getting her information from the Jewish newspapers in New York and San Francisco, and Emma Goldman and all these people in these union socialist railroad workers who come in and out of her store. She's getting all that, and she's loving it. Yeah. was Hetty was living in that tight world in New York where if you make one mistake, you end up in jail and you have to watch everyone. And her husband was not the man he should have been. Hetty in some ways more deadly because if she got mad at you, she'd really come at you hard. But she's a little more, I'd say more savvy, a little more wise.
Okay.
A little more wise.
She's fun to read. She's really fun to read.
Yeah. Well, I like spending time with these people.
Yeah. Do you miss Chicken Hill? I was thinking you might.
A little bit, yeah. I do. I miss that. I miss Malachi and Moshe's friendship. I miss Chona, of course. I miss Nate's, solidity but once you leave that place, that's it. You can't go back. You can't do a part two. I mean, I'm sure some people do a part two, a part three, but I'm like, I feel more like Satchel Paige. What's the point of looking back? There's always more stuff ahead, there's new songs to write, new places to go, new people to meet. So I miss it, but there's always a new garden to make, there's always seed. All you got to do is walk out your door and say hello to somebody,
Hey, so of course we're bumping up against time because I knew that would happen. But, without giving too much away, and I know I hinted at this character before, but this kid Monkey Pants, I really love this character. And he is not like anyone I've met in a book in a really long time. And I just feel like we can talk a little bit more about him without totally giving stuff up, if you agree.
Sure. I mean, Monkey Pants is a seminal character in the book because his courage and his humanity powers the book and really helps save Dodo's skin. And I think it's important that you have characters that don't look like John Wayne and Brigitte Bardot, whoever the hell, Britney Spears. And with all due respect, I mean, this is a kid who's a convoluted, he has cerebral palsy. He's, and what they used to call cerebral palsy. So, but inside, he's profoundly deep and smart and intelligent, and he manages great things. The lesson there is that children like this have so much to teach us. I mean, first of all, their parents, there's a special heaven for their parents. The truth is their parents get special gifts that most of us who don't have quote unquote disabled kids get. Because these kinds of kids have so much to teach, particularly those of us who consider ourselves artists. They have so much to teach us. So Monkey Pants has a lot to show us. And I was so glad to meet him and to get to know him on the page.
Thank you, Monkey Pants. And thank you, James McBride.
This
was so much fun. Thank you so much. Heaven and Earth grocery store is out now. And if somehow you haven't yet read The Good Lord Bird or Deacon King Kong, those are out in paperback.
All right. Well, thanks a lot.
Thank you for listening. Poured Over is a Barnes & Noble production. To help other readers find us, please rate and review the show wherever you listen to podcasts.